Believe it or not, for the last 12 years, I've studied these photos of the victims. And there is no, we have a shot of all of the victims together here. And when you look over at the photos, I have no recollection of any of them, never met them. And we've gone over this more than once. They're just names and faces. And when you look at them,
on January 2nd, 1972, 16-year-old Timothy McCoy got up early to make his host breakfast. He had met John Wayne Gacy at the Chicago bus terminal the night before, and Gacy let him stay over while he made his way home. McCoy got out eggs and bacon and set the table for two. Then he walked up the stairs to wake Gacy, not realizing he hadn't put down the knife he'd been using. What happened next would set the scene for the rest of John Wayne Gacy's life. Not realizing the boy had intended no harm, Gacy stabbed him in the chest, killing him. He then buried his body in the crawl space beneath his home and covered the grave with concrete. Killing McCoy repeatedly gave Gacy a mind-numbing orgasm. The murder had allegedly been a mistake, but it instilled in Gacy the ultimate thrill that he would crave for the rest of his life. Over the next 6 years, dozens more bodies would join Timothy McCoy, and all the while, Gacy pretended to be an upstanding member of his community. He performed at parties and hospitals as Pogo the Clown, but his passion for murder was no joke. Those who knew John Wayne Gacy would never have expected him to turn out as he had. Almost everyone who had met described him as a mild-mannered and likable man. For most of his life, he worked in a customer service, first managing 3 of his father-in-law's KFC franchises, then starting his own construction business. His customers remembered him as kind, generous, and willing to help people out. He employed local teenagers in need of jobs and contributed heavily to his local junior chambers of commerce. He even took time out of his weekends to dress up as a clown for kids' birthday party. However, as authorities would learn, something seriously disturbing had been inside him all along. John Wayne Gacy was born in Chicago on March 17, 1942. His father had always despised him, called him a sissy, and abused him from age 4. He often berated the boy and whipped him with a belt. When Gacy was 7 years old and a family friend molested him, he didn't tell anyone for fear of being beaten. Early on, Gacy realized that he was gay, but during the 1950s, homosexuality was still taboo, so he pretended to be straight his entire life. Gacy had a congenital heart condition that limited his physical activity and plagued him with lifelong obesity. He spent much of his youth in the hospital. When he was 11, doctors discovered that he had a blood clot in his brain. They were able to treat it, but even that didn't spare Gacy from his father's wrath. Eventually, Gacy had enough of the abuse and he picked up and moved out west. While working as a funeral home assistant in Las Vegas, Gacy slept on a cot behind the embalming room. One night, after observing the mortician embalming dead bodies, he crawled into a coffin with one. He laid in the coffin for a time, embracing and caressing the body, a teenage boy. The event shocked him so much that he returned home and enrolled in business school. After just a few months in Vegas, he never told anyone about his night with the body in the morgue. After graduating from Northwestern Business College, John Wayne Gacy met Marilyn Myers, a co-worker, and they hit it off. The couple married in 1964, and Gacy took over the management of his father-in-law's Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises. He and Myers had 2 children, and what was seemingly a perfect life. He later on joined the Waterloo Gacys, a group of businessmen who participated in wife swapping, prostitution, pornography, and drug abuse. He even opened a club in his own basement targeted at teenagers, where they could drink and play pool without getting in trouble. He often would build up trust with his victims so they wouldn't need to be on guard. He was their employer, their friend. He may even have someone who provided them with alcohol and drugs and maybe a place to sleep at night. That's an easy way to kill someone, Detective Sergeant Jason Moran of the Cook County Sheriff Office said years later. Then, Gacy began to force some of these young men, including those he employed at KFC, to perform sexual acts with him. This would be his first downfall. Voorhees kept quiet about the incident until March 1968 when he told his father and spurred a criminal investigation into Gacy that destroyed the facade of a normal life he'd crafted. A few months later, he paid a KFC employee $300 to beat up Voorhees, hoping to scare him off for testifying in court, but Voorhees escaped and reported the attempted beating, and the case against Gacy only escalated. In December 1967, John Wayne Gacy pleaded guilty to oral sodomy. At the time, sexual relations between two people of the same sex was illegal in Iowa. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and was promptly served divorce papers from his wife, whom he would never see again. But less than 2 years after his sentencing, John Wayne Gacy was granted parole for being a model prisoner. He was given 12 months probation under the condition that he moved back to Chicago to live with his mother and maintained a 10 p.m. curfew. He agreed and declared, "I'll never go back to jail." Months after his release, John Wayne Gacy lured a teenage boy into his house and tried to rape him. Gacy was charged with sexual assault, but the charges were dropped when the boy failed to show up in court. Gacy had technically violated his parole, but somehow his parole officer was never aware of the episode. By 1971, Gacy had settled into a new home in Norwood Park. Eventually, the house became a graveyard for 29 young men and boys. It was where all of his gruesome murders would be committed, and also he would gain local fame as Pogo the Clown. While in prison, John had become something of an artist and repeatedly sketched the image of Pogo the Clown. After his release, he joined the local Jolly Joker Club, a clown club that would perform at birthday parties and hospitals. He taught himself how to apply clown makeup and turned himself into Pogo the Clown as he had imagined in his drawings. He performed as Pogo the Clown at all sorts of local parties. But Pogo the Clown didn't fool everybody. Carol Huff, his high school sweetheart and second wife who he had married in 1972, questioned his sexuality. When Gacy told her he was bisexual later on in 1975, Huff divorced him and left him alone in their house. Though she denied knowledge of what was to come, Carol later admitted to authorities that she had seen him bringing in teenager boys into their garage. After his divorce, the killer clown had the freedom to bring in more victims into his home. All of his victims were killed in and stored under his house, except for 4 people who were thrown in a river nearby. Gacy's victims were all young men and boys. He preyed on still unidentified teenagers, some who were drifters from out of town, and some who were local boys who worked for him. He lured some into his car by impersonating an officer, or to his house with the offer of a job, a place to stay, a place to party, or even for money. Once he had his victims in his space, Gacy persuaded them with drugs or alcohol, or a sick magic trick, during which he would handcuff them and dangle the key in front of their faces. Then he would torture, rape, and murder them. One of Gacy's favorite acts of torture was to sit on his victims with all of his weight, which I might mention he was 230 pounds or 104 kilograms, and force the victims to give him oral sex. He strangled and revived his victims, sometimes even partially drowning them in his bathtub. Gacy would then have the audacity to participate in the search parties for some of these boys, as he was friendly with their parents and was considered an upstanding member of the community. He had set himself up to kill unfettered and unsuspected, but his 33rd murder wouldn't go quite as planned, and it would be his last. At about 9 p.m. on December 11, 1978, Elizabeth Pice drove to pick up her son named Robert from his job at a pharmacy. Robert went outside and told his mother to wait a few minutes. He wanted to talk to a customer about a summer contracting job that would pay him twice what he was currently making. That was the last time Elizabeth saw her son. Before midnight, she went to the police station to file a missing persons report. Police figured out that man who Robert Pice was going to talk to was John Wayne Gacy, whose company, PDM Contractors, had recently remodeled Pice's pharmacy. They called him in the station for questioning, and Gacy obliged. After taking Pice's body and dumping it into the river, within hours, authorities searched Gacy's home. They didn't find any bodies, but they did find evidence that Pice had been there, a receipt that belonged to a friend of his. It wasn't until December 22, 1978, almost exactly 10 years after his first sodomy conviction, that Gacy the Killer Clown confessed to murdering dozens of young men and boys. Investigators swarmed his house and uncovered 29 bodies in the crawlspace. Many had decomposed beyond recognition, and dental experts were brought in to identify John Wayne Gacy's victims by their teeth. 3 years later, the Killer Clown used an insanity plea during his trial, hoping for a non-guilty verdict. The jury didn't buy it. Gacy was sentenced to death and dropped the friendly facade he had maintained for all those years. He didn't seem to have any remorse for his victims. Though John Wayne Gacy is long gone and his house has since been demolished, his legacy lives on. Or I should say, his infamy lives on. Most of John Gacy's victims that were retrieved from his crawlspace were identified and released to their families for burial. However, 23 years after his death, authorities are still trying to identify the rest. In July 2017, one of the last remaining bodies was finally identified, but his grieving family had already been dead. 6 of John Wayne Gacy's victims remain anonymous. I'm sure most of us immediately think of Pennywise the Clown when we think of Killer Clown, which is a fair assumption we make, but obviously the one key difference between Gacy and Pennywise is one is set in the fictional world and one is set in reality. My friends and I always joke around about horror characters possibly killing one of us because we watch a lot of horror movies, mostly Chucky and Jigsaw, but not in a million years did we expect that an actual circus clown was a serial killer. I know that most of the serial killers I've talked about are pretty popular and are well known, but to me, I genuinely do not know their story. I know bits and pieces, but never the full picture. That's why I created this Meet the Blank series, because I don't know much about these serial killers, and I thought I would share my experience with the world. So if you like this video, then please check out the other Meet the videos on your screen now. Alright guys, this brings us to the end of the video. If you like this video, please give it a like. Sub to the channel would mean the world to me, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.